So Reddit, buckle up, because I've been waiting 3 years for this exact moment and I need to get this off my chest before I do something I've been planning since I was 25. Quick background, because context matters here. I'm Ray, 28, and I grew up as the oldest son in a household where my younger brother Steven could do no wrong. And I mean nothing. Steven is 24 now and has never held a job longer than 4 months, crashed 2 cars that our parents replaced, dropped out of community college twice, and somehow still lives in my parents' basement like he's waiting for his trust fund to kick in. Spoiler alert. There is no trust fund. There's just my parents, Paul and Joanne, treating him like the second coming while I was expected to be the family mule from age 16 onward. I worked through high school at a hardware store. I worked through college while Steven got to focus on his studies, which he promptly failed. When I graduated with an accounting degree and got a decent job, my parents asked me to help pay for Steven's second attempt at school. I said no. That was when things really shifted. Suddenly, I was the selfish one, the ungrateful son who forgot where he came from. My mom started this whole narrative that I thought I was too good for the family now that I had my fancy degree and my apartment in the city. Okay, so we're speedrunning how to create a supervillain origin story, because this is textbook. You got one kid who's basically a professional failure, and I'm not even hating, some people struggle. But the audacity to then turn to the kid who worked through high school and say, hey, fund your brother's second attempt at the thing he already failed. That's not family. That's a Kickstarter with emotional blackmail. And the mom spinning this whole too good for us now narrative. Classic. You work hard, you succeed. And suddenly, your success becomes evidence of your betrayal. Make it make sense. 3 years ago, right after my 25th birthday, I came home for what I thought was a normal family dinner. Instead, my dad sat me down and told me that since I was doing so well financially, it was time for me to step up and help the family properly. He wanted me to co-sign on a refinancing of their house so they could pull out equity to help Steven start a business. Some vague idea about a food truck that Steven had been talking about for maybe 2 weeks. I asked what happened to the money they'd already spent on Steven's education, his cars, his everything. My dad told me that was none of my concern and that family helps family. I said no. I said it clearly and firmly. My mom cried and called me heartless. My dad said he was disappointed but not surprised given how I'd changed. Steven just sat there smirking because he knew they'd keep pushing. I left that night and I made a decision that has shaped every choice I've made since. I would build my life so that when they came at me again, and I knew they would, I would be ready. A food truck. A food truck that Steven had been thinking about for 2 weeks. Not a business plan, not market research, not even a solid menu. Just vibes and a dream that'll cost someone else 6 figures. And when Ray asks a completely reasonable question about where all the previous money went, Dad hits him with, that's none of your concern. None of his concern? You're asking him to put his financial future on the line and he's not allowed to audit the books? That's not how investors work, Paul. But here's where Ray becomes my hero. He didn't just say no and move on. He said no and started building. 3 years of preparation. This man went full Batman. He saw the signal in the sky and said, not today. 3 years of grinding. I got promoted twice. I saved aggressively. I bought a small condo outright because I refused to have any debt they could use as leverage. I documented every interaction with my family in a folder on my computer. I kept every text, every voicemail, every passive-aggressive Facebook post my mom made about ungrateful children. I talked to a lawyer about what could happen if they ever tried to forge my signature or use my information. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. Last Thursday, I was at work when my phone started blowing up. First text from my dad said they'd found a way to get the house refinanced and they needed me to sign some papers to finalize everything. That it was already done, and I just needed to make it official. I knew immediately what this was. They'd either forged something or they were lying about it being done to pressure me into compliance. Second text from my mom said, if I didn't sign the papers by Monday, they'd tell everyone in the family in our hometown that I abandoned them in their time of need. She said they'd sacrificed everything for me, and this was how I repaid them. Same script, 3 years later, not a single original thought. Third text from my dad said Steven needed a fresh start, and I'd already had mine. That the $200K they wanted me to take responsibility for was basically just repayment for raising me. Like I was an investment that needed to show returns. Repayment for raising me. I need everyone to sit with that sentence. Repayment for raising me. You don't get to have children and then send them an invoice when they turn profitable. That's not parenting. That's human livestock farming. You raised him because that's what you signed up for when you had a kid. And the threat to tell everyone in the family? That's not concern, that's a hostage negotiation. Give us the money or your reputation gets it. Meanwhile, Steven needs a fresh start. Bro has had more fresh starts than a Windows computer with a virus. At some point, a fresh start just becomes a pattern of never finishing anything. I didn't respond immediately. I let them stew for 2 hours while I finished my workday and went to the gym. Then I sent one text to my dad, asking him to send me copies of whatever documents they wanted me to sign so I could review them with my lawyer before any decisions were made. Just that, professional and calm. The response was immediate and exactly what I expected. My dad called me 17 times. My mom sent a wall of text about how I was breaking her heart and tearing the family apart over money. Steven, who almost never texts me directly, sent a message that said, "Thanks for the new start, bro. You're the best." Like it was already a done deal. Like I was just going to roll over and hand them $200,000 because they raised me and Steven needed another chance to fail at something. Here's what none of them know. I've spent 3 years watching their financial situation from the outside. My Aunt Clara, my mom's sister, has been increasingly concerned about how Paul and Joanne have been spending. She's seen the new furniture, the vacation photos, the expensive dinners, while they constantly complain about money. Clara and I have stayed close because, unlike my parents, she actually sees me as a person and not an ATM. She mentioned last month that she overheard my mom saying they were having trouble making their mortgage payments and that they needed to figure something out soon. So when they came to me with this demand, I already knew they were desperate. What they don't know is that I've been talking to Clara about what happens when someone in financial distress tries to pressure family members into taking on debt. What they don't know is that I've already consulted with my lawyer about the texts they sent, which look a lot like financial coercion. What they don't know is that I have no intention of signing anything, and I have every intention of making sure Steven's fresh start comes with a reality check that's been 3 years in the making. Monday is in 4 days. They think I'm going to cave because I always caved before. They think the family pressure, the guilt trips, the threat of social humiliation will break me down like it did when I was younger, and just wanted to keep the peace. They picked the wrong time to corner me. They picked the wrong son to underestimate. I'll update after Monday because something tells me this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And honestly, I'm counting on it. Steven texting, "Thanks for the new start, bro, you're the best," before Ray even agreed is the most golden child behavior I've ever witnessed. That's not confidence, that's conditioning. This man has never heard the word no stick in his entire life, so he genuinely cannot fathom a universe where Ray doesn't fold. And Ray out here playing chess while they're playing checkers. He's got Aunt Clara as an intelligence asset, a lawyer on speed dial, 3 years of receipts, and the calm of a man who has already run this simulation 1,000 times in his head. They thought they were ambushing him. They walked into his ambush. This is beautiful. This is art. Update 1. All right, Reddit. Monday came and went, and this family of mine decided to go nuclear in ways I didn't fully anticipate. Shout out to everyone who told me to hold my ground because you were right. These people have lost their minds. Friday night, 2 days before their deadline, my parents showed up at my condo. No warning, just my dad's Ford parked in my visitor spot and both of them at my door when I got home. My mom had clearly been crying, her go-to guilt move. My dad looked angry. His go-to when guilt doesn't work fast enough. I let them in because honestly, I wanted this conversation. 3 years of preparation, and I finally had them in front of me, desperate. My dad started immediately saying he was disappointed I hadn't responded properly and demanded lawyer involvement. He actually used the word courtesy, like they'd done me a favor by demanding $200K. I asked him to explain exactly what documents they wanted me to sign. He said it was simple, a refinancing agreement to access equity, and since the house would eventually be mine, and Steven's inheritance anyway, I should think of it as investing in my own future. I asked why my name needed to be on it if it was their house. He got defensive and said the bank wanted additional security given their current financial situation. First admission, their current financial situation. I pushed, and my mom said they'd had setbacks but nothing serious. Medical bills, car repairs, helping Steven. I pointed out Steven was 24 and had been getting on his feet for 6 years. She told me not to start with that attitude. I asked directly if they'd already told the bank I would be involved before asking me. My dad didn't answer immediately. My mom filled the silence saying they may have mentioned to the mortgage company that their son with the good job would be willing to co-sign, just to keep conversation moving forward. So they'd used my name and profession without my consent. I asked if they'd provided my actual information. My dad said no, just general information. I told him there was now a paper trail of them representing me as a willing participant in something I never agreed to. My mom asked why I was treating them like criminals when they were just trying to keep a roof over their heads. I asked whose fault it was they were in this position. She said not everyone has my advantages. I reminded her my advantages came from working while Steven got handed everything and squandered it. My dad changed tactics. He said if I didn't sign by Monday, they would tell the extended family I'd abandoned them and cut them off financially. He said Grandma Valerie would be heartbroken. I told him to go ahead. She could hear his story and then mine, including the text demanding 200K for raising me. He said I was twisting things. I said the texts were clear and I'd saved every one. They left with my dad saying they'd give me until Monday to think about what kind of son I wanted to be. Not everyone has your advantages, is doing astronomical heavy lifting here. Your advantages? Ma'am? His advantages were working. While Stephen was failing classes he didn't pay for, Ray was at a hardware store. That's not advantage, that's sacrifice. And the parents already told the bank Ray would co-sign before even asking him? That's not keeping the conversation moving. That's fraud-adjacent behavior. They were so confident in their ability to manipulate their own son that they pre-sold his compliance to a financial institution. And Dad's final line about, what kind of son you want to be? I love how in their minds, a good son is one who destroys his own financial future to fund his brother's perpetual adolescence. That's not family values, that's a pyramid scheme with Thanksgiving dinners. Sunday morning, Stephen texted a long message. He said our parents were falling apart, Mom hadn't stopped crying, Dad was talking about selling the house. He asked if I really hated them enough to watch them become homeless. I called him. He asked why I couldn't just sign and let them figure out payments. I asked what he thought the odds were of them not defaulting. He got quiet. Then he said something surprising. He said he knew he'd been the favorite, always knew. He said it wasn't his fault Mom and Dad made those choices, he was just a kid when it started. Being mad at him for being loved more wasn't fair. I told him I wasn't mad he was loved more. I was mad their love for him came at my expense. Every dollar they gave him was one they guilted me for not providing. Every failure of his was excused, while every success of mine meant I owed them more. He said that was harsh. I said it was accurate. He hung up. Monday came. I didn't sign anything. Instead, I called Clara and told her everything. She wasn't surprised. She told me my parents had approached her husband last year about borrowing money and he'd refused. They'd been working through family members, testing who would crack. Clara warned me that Grandma Valerie was already asking questions because my mom called her Sunday, crying about how I was tearing the family apart. The narrative was already spreading. I was being painted as the villain before I'd made my first move. Well, Reddit, if I'm going to be the villain anyway, I might as well earn it. I've got a plan 3 years in the making, and it starts with a conversation with the mortgage company. My parents told I was a willing participant. More updates coming because this is about to get very complicated for everyone except me. Steven's moment of self-awareness is fascinating because he acknowledges he was the favorite. It wasn't my fault, I was just a kid. But then does absolutely nothing with that information. Okay, you were a kid then. You're 24 now. At what point does awareness become responsibility? Because right now he's using "I didn't ask for this" as a permanent shield against ever having to change. And the parents going through family members testing who would crack? That's not desperation, that's a system. They've been running this play for years. Ray isn't the first person they've tried to squeeze. He's just the first one with receipts and a plan. Update 2. Reddit. Things have escalated faster than even I expected, and I need to vent because this week has been wild. For those just joining, my parents tried to pressure me into taking on 200K in debt for them and my golden child brother Steven. I refused. Now the family war has officially begun. First thing I did Tuesday morning was contact the mortgage company my parents had been working with. I explained I was calling because my parents may have mentioned me as a potential co-signer, but I had never agreed to participate in any refinancing. The representative asked for my information to check their records. After a few minutes, she confirmed that yes, my name had been mentioned in preliminary discussions as a potential co-signer with strong financials. No documents had been submitted with my signature, but my employment and approximate income had been discussed. I asked her to note in their file that I had not authorized any use of my information and would not be participating in any loan application. I also asked for written confirmation of this to be sent to my address. She agreed. When I hung up, I forwarded everything to my lawyer just to have it on record. That afternoon, my mom texted asking why the mortgage company had called to verify information about me. She said they told her I'd contacted them and asked to be removed from consideration. She asked if I was really going to sabotage their only chance to save their home. I didn't respond. Wednesday, Grandma Valerie called me. Now, I love my grandmother. She's 82 and still sharp as anything. But she's also been fed a very specific story by my mother. She started by saying she'd heard I was having some disagreements with my parents about money and She wanted to understand what was happening. I appreciated that she asked instead of accused. I told her the truth. I explained that mom and dad had demanded I take on 200K in debt responsibility, claiming I owed them for raising me. I told her they'd used my name with a mortgage company without asking me. I told her about the texts threatening to turn the family against me if I didn't comply. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked why Paul and Joanne were in such financial trouble. I told her I didn't know all the details, but I knew a lot of money had gone towards Stephen over the years. She said she'd noticed that too, but always thought they had it under control. I said clearly they didn't. She asked what I was planning to do. I said I was planning to protect myself and let them face the consequences of their own choices. She didn't argue with me. She just said she wished things hadn't gotten so bad between us all. I told her I wished that too, but I wasn't the one who started this. Grandma Valerie asking questions instead of accusing is exactly what good family members do. She's been told a story, but she's wise enough to know every story has another side. And notice how when Ray tells her the truth, the actual texts, the actual demands, the actual numbers, she doesn't defend her daughter. She gets quiet. Because the truth doesn't need defending, it just needs to be heard. Mom's sabotage text is also Chef's kiss delusion. You told a bank your son would co-sign without asking him. He corrected the record. That's not sabotage, that's accuracy. You sabotaged yourself when you tried to use someone else's credit rating as a hostage. Thursday is when everything blew up. My parents drove to my workplace. My workplace. I was coming back from lunch and there they were, waiting in the parking lot. My dad said we needed to talk like adults, and since I wouldn't answer their calls, they had no choice. My mom said they were desperate and didn't know what else to do. I told them coming to my job was crossing a line. My dad said I'd crossed plenty of lines by contacting the mortgage company and poisoning Grandma Valerie against them. I said I'd told Grandma the truth, and if the truth poisoned her against them, that was their problem. My mom started crying and asking what happened to me. What happened to her sweet boy who used to care about family? I told her that boy grew up and realized caring about family was only supposed to go one direction in this household. I told her I'd spent years being guilted for not giving enough while Stephen took everything without a second thought. I asked her when she'd ever demanded Stephen sacrifice anything for the family. She couldn't answer. My dad tried a different approach. He said they were willing to negotiate. He said maybe 200K was too much to ask, but surely I could help with something. Maybe 50,000. Maybe pay some of their mortgage payments for a year while they got back on their feet. He said they'd put it in writing. Make it official. Whatever I needed to feel secure. I asked him why I would trust any agreement with people who'd already tried to use my name without permission. He said that was a misunderstanding. They never meant to actually forge anything. They just mentioned me to keep the conversation going with the bank. I told him mentioning me without consent was already a violation of my trust. He threw his hands up and said I was being impossible. Then he said something that made 3 years of anger feel completely justified. He said they'd made the mistake of investing everything in me. The education, the support, the belief that I'd make something of myself and remember where I came from. He said Stephen had always been a lost cause, but they'd hoped I would be the one to lift the family up. He said they never thought I'd abandon them when they needed me most. So there it was. They'd always seen me as an investment, never as a son. Stephen was the one they loved unconditionally. I was the one who was supposed to pay dividends. The fact that he finally said it out loud almost made me laugh. I told my dad I was done discussing this. I told them both if they came to my workplace again, I'd file a harassment complaint. My mom grabbed my arm and begged me to reconsider. I pulled away and walked inside. Dad just said the quiet part out loud. Stephen was always a lost cause. Your son, your youngest son, a lost cause. So you poured all your resources into him anyway and expected your other son to fund it? Make that math make sense. And we invested in you. Invested in what? Ray worked through high school and college. What exactly did they invest besides the bare minimum legal requirement of feeding and housing their minor child? They didn't invest in Ray. They counted on Ray. They saw him succeeding and thought, was I excellent? This one will pay off eventually. That's not parenting. That's venture capitalism with extra guilt trips. And showing up at his workplace, the one place that actually provides the money they're trying to take, that's like setting fire to the ATM because it won't give you someone else's cash. Friday, Stephen showed up at my condo. He said our parents were talking about selling the house and moving into an apartment. He said mom had been having chest pains from stress. He said dad had been drinking more. He asked if destroying our family was worth whatever point I was trying to prove. I asked him if he'd ever considered getting a job and helping them himself. He said he was between opportunities. I asked when he'd last contributed a single dollar to the household. He said that wasn't fair because he'd had setbacks. I said I'd had setbacks too, but I'd worked through them instead of expecting someone else to fix everything. He asked what it would take for me to help. I said I'd consider helping when he got a job and kept it for 6 months. When mom and dad apologized for treating me like an ATM. When someone in this family acknowledged what they'd put me through. He called me petty. I said I was realistic. He left saying I'd regret this when mom and dad had nothing and it was my fault. I told him it would never be my fault because I wasn't the one who spent their savings on a son who refused to grow up. Saturday morning, Clara texted. Apparently, my parents made one last desperate move. They called a family meeting for Sunday at Grandma Valerie's house. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin was invited. The topic? What to do about Ray. I'm going to that meeting, and I'm bringing every text, every voicemail, every piece of evidence I've collected over 3 years. If they want to make this a family trial, I'll give them one they won't forget. Final update coming after Sunday. This ends one way or another. Between Opportunities is doing a lot of heavy lifting for a 24-year-old who's never held a job more than 4 months. And Stephen asking, is destroying our family worth whatever point you're trying to prove, while contributing absolutely nothing to solving the problem, is peak entitlement. You get a job, Stephen. You help with the mortgage. You sacrifice something for once in your entire life. But no, he's here to guilt Ray while being between opportunities. The parents calling a family meeting titled What to Do About Ray is straight-up tribunal energy. They're putting their son on trial in front of the whole family. But they forgot one thing. Ray has been building his case file for 3 years. They wanted a public execution, and they're about to get a public audit. Final update. Reddit. The family meeting happened, and I'm still processing everything, but I needed to write this while it's fresh. This is the ending I've been waiting 3 years for. Sunday afternoon, I pulled up to Grandma Valerie's house and counted 7 cars in the driveway. My parents had really rallied the troops. Clara was already there and met me at the door. She whispered that my parents had spent the first 20 minutes painting me as an ungrateful son who'd abandoned them in their darkest hour. My mom had cried. My dad had talked about sacrifice. Stephen had stayed quiet. I walked into that living room and every head turned. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all looking at me like I was the villain of a story they'd been told without my input. My mom started to say something about being glad I came, but I cut her off. I said if we were going to have a family trial, we were going to do it properly with all the evidence on the table. I pulled out my phone and started reading texts out loud. The one where my dad said I owed them $200K for raising me. The one where my mom threatened to tell everyone I abandoned them if I didn't sign by Monday. The one where Stephen thanked me for his new start like I'd already agreed. The one where my dad said he'd make my life difficult if I didn't cooperate. The room got uncomfortable fast. My uncle Marcus asked if those texts were real. I handed him my phone and told him to scroll through the conversation himself. He read silently, then passed the phone to his wife. One by one, family members read what my parents had actually written versus what they'd been told. My dad tried to explain. He said those texts were taken out of context, that they'd been desperate and said things they didn't mean. I asked him which part was out of context. The part where he said I owed them money for raising me? The part where he threatened me? The part where he used my name with a mortgage company without permission? My mom jumped in saying I was making them look like monsters when all they wanted was to keep their family home. She said parents make sacrifices for their children and sometimes they need help in return. I told her I'd never asked for those sacrifices and I'd been paying them back emotionally my entire adult life. Then I addressed the real issue that nobody wanted to talk about. I asked the room how much money everyone thought my parents had spent on Stephen over the past decade. The failed education attempts, the replaced cars, the covered rent, the paid debts. I said I'd watched my parents pour tens of thousands into my brother while simultaneously guilting me for not contributing more to the family. Stephen finally spoke up. He said I was just jealous and bitter and using this as an excuse to hurt everyone. I told him I wasn't jealous. I was tired. Tired of being the backup plan, the emergency fund, the responsible one who was expected to clean up messes I didn't make. Grandma Valerie raised her hand and the room went quiet. She asked Paul and Joanne directly how much debt they were in and why. My dad started to give a vague answer, but she cut him off and said she wanted real numbers. After a long pause, my mom admitted they were behind on their mortgage by 4 months and had about $30,000 in credit card debt on top of that. Grandma asked how that happened. My dad started talking about the economy and unexpected expenses, but Clara spoke up. She mentioned that my parents had approached her husband about borrowing money last year. She mentioned the new furniture she'd seen, the vacation photos, the expensive dinners they'd posted about online. She asked how they could be spending on those things while falling behind on their mortgage. The receipts, the literal receipts. Clara came with the social media evidence. You can't cry poverty while posting vacation photos, buying new furniture, and eating at expensive restaurants. Social media really is the downfall of liars because everything is time-stamped. And Grandma Valerie cutting off Dad's vague answer and demanding real numbers? That's generational authority being wielded correctly. 82 years old and still not accepting nonsense from her own children. The room shifting from, "What do we do about Ray?" to "Wait, what have Paul and Joanne been doing?" is the most satisfying narrative pivot I've ever witnessed. They set up a tribunal for Ray and accidentally put themselves on trial. The room shifted. Suddenly, this wasn't about ungrateful Ray. This was about Paul and Joanne's financial choices. My aunt asked why Stephen wasn't working. My uncle asked why they'd refinanced the house 3 years ago and where that money went. Questions my parents couldn't answer without admitting they'd prioritize Stephen's endless fresh starts over their own stability. My dad turned to me and said I could still fix this. He said one signature and all of this would go away. I told him I wasn't going to mortgage my future to enable their choices. I told him if they lost the house, it was because of decisions they made, not because I refused to rescue them from consequences. My mom called me cruel. I told her what was cruel was raising one son to take responsibility for everything, while raising another to take responsibility for nothing. What was cruel was expecting me to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford while telling the family I was the problem. Stephen stormed out. My parents sat there with no defense left. Grandma Valerie said she loved all of her grandchildren, but she couldn't support pressuring Ray into debt he didn't create. She said Paul and Joanne needed to face their situation honestly instead of looking for someone else to bail them out. The meeting ended with no resolution from my parents. No one offered them money. No one blamed me for refusing. When I left, Clara hugged me and said she was proud of how I handled myself. I could still fix this. Dad, my guy, you are still in front of the entire family who just read your threatening texts trying to get Ray to sign. That's not desperation, that's pathology. You cannot stop. Even when the game is clearly over, even when everyone sees the truth, you're still running the play. And Stephen storming out instead of staying to face the music is exactly the behavior that got everyone here in the first place. Discomfort arrives and Stephen leaves. That's his entire life pattern in one moment. But Grandma's final word? I can't support pressuring Ray into debt he didn't create. That's the gavel dropping. The matriarch has spoken. The trial is over. Ray wins. That was 2 weeks ago. My parents are now officially in foreclosure proceedings because they couldn't make the payments and couldn't find anyone to co-sign for them. They're looking at apartments. Stephen texted me demanding to know how he's supposed to live without a basement to stay in. I didn't respond. My dad called last week, finally reaching me after I let 17 previous calls go to voicemail. He wanted to know how their house was in foreclosure and what I'd done. I told him I'd done nothing except refuse to participate in their scheme. I told him their house was in foreclosure because they couldn't pay for it. Their problem, their consequences. He asked if I was happy now. I told him I wasn't happy. I was free. Free from the guilt, free from the expectations, free from being the family ATM. They wanted me to sign papers and take on $200K for raising me. Instead, I walked away with my savings, my credit intact, and a family that finally sees the truth. Some children do forget who gave them everything. I remembered exactly who gave me nothing but pressure, and I acted accordingly.